Hooray! Hello, everyone. Let's start healing. I'm Adrienne Murchison, and welcome to episode 17 of our Let's Start Healing podcast. I just welcomed you with hello in Estonian, Tere. And you know why we do this? You know why we say hello, why I say hello to you every week in a different language? Because we have more in common than we think. And what we have in common can change the world. Before we get started, I want to invite you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, send me an email at letstarthealingpodcast@gmail.com. And remember that all of our episodes are available on our YouTube channel and on Apple Podcasts. They're all under Let's Start Healing Podcast. So in this episode, we are talking about a little bit of nonviolent communication. You know, communication is everything. And some people don't like to communicate. They like to shut down. They're people of very few words, but communication is everything. And what I have learned is that it's not only about being able to engage and understand someone else and being able to explain where I'm coming from. If I do it effectively, I am able to really tap into what I'm feeling and what's going on with me. And I bring that up because our guest today, Clarice Belcher, is a facilitator of nonviolent communication workshops and practice groups. And I know of 3 here in the Atlanta area. I believe there's probably many all over the country. And she facilitates her workshops with a book called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And in this book, and she will talk about this, but in this book, there's a list of feelings and needs. And so there's a list of feelings when we're satisfied and a list of feelings when we're not satisfied within this book. And of course, our feelings are not limited to this list, but the list is very helpful. And then there's also a list of needs. And so in our conversation, I will bring up something that was so enlightening for me about a year ago. I was feeling upset about something that was going on with me and someone that I was seeing at the time. And I decided to pull out this list to see what I was feeling. And I didn't expect to, and I actually wrote down what I was feeling. And I didn't expect to write down the words that I did. So just to give you a little bit of an example, I want to share with you some of the words that I wrote down. And so in general, I could say I felt annoyed and sad. So when I look at this list, I mean, you could have asked me at the time, well, you know, how are you feeling? Well, I'm annoyed. I'm sad. Well, I actually looked at the list and I wrote down what I was really feeling. And these are under these words on the list in the book, which is under annoyed. What you could be feeling if you're annoyed, what you could be feeling if you're sad. I wrote disconnected, disquiet, dismayed, disgruntled, sad, dejected, disappointed, discouraged, disheartened, depleted, displeased. I also wrote tired, which was under the word fatigue. And so those words helped me to really move more into what I was feeling. So it was really, it helped me to go beneath the surface. So Clarice will go into that. I hope that you find this intriguing as I do. So let's meet her and let's get started. Let's start healing. Hi, Clarice.
Well, hi, Adrienne.
Welcome. I'm so happy that you're doing this. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure and my joy.
So you are talking about nonviolent communication with us. And a lot of our listeners don't know what nonviolent communication is. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. The idea of nonviolent communication that I use comes from Marshall Rosenberg's book called Nonviolent Communication. And he talks about how many of us have been trained and enculturated to speak in ways that are very violent. Violence doesn't necessarily mean I'm screaming at you or cursing at you. Silence can be a form of violence. Rolling my eyes at something you've said can be a form of violence. So there are very subtle ways of communicating in ways that are violent. And he uses the term violence the way Gandhi did, that this is not our natural state, violence. Compassion is our natural state. And when violence moves out of our hearts, what is left is compassion. And compassion is who and what we really are.
And so you teach workshops on nonviolent communication.
Yes.
And are you certified? Is that something that he offers? Or?
He does offer it. And in fact, there's a center called the Center for Nonviolent Communication, and they do offer training, but I elected not to do that. Marshall did not think that you had to be certified to do that. And so I decided not to do that.
So I've participated in your workshops and share with us what it, can you describe it for me?
Well, it's an endurance test, I guess. It's 3 hours long.
But it goes by quickly.
Oh, well, I'm happy to hear that. So my intent in the workshops is to provide an introduction. So if someone's like, what is this thing, nonviolent communication? What does that mean? To give them some sense of how Marshall saw that. And he had two pieces that I include that are very important. One is how to speak to someone when I am at the edge of a reaction. And then the other is empathy. And so I like to include both of those. It takes about 3 hours to do that, what with examples that we give, and sometimes real life examples come up too. So how do you manage that? What does that look like? So those workshops are really introduction. Then sometimes people may very well resonate with this material and decide, I want to do more of this, but where do I go? And that was how the practice groups came about, from people who wanted to continue the work that they had learned about and then actually apply it to their own real lives.
And so with the practice groups, we're looking at, and in the book, in Marshall Rosenberg's book on nonviolent communication, we're looking at our feelings and needs.
Yes.
Right?
So there were 4 aspects that he thought were very important. So if I were upset about something and want to slow down my reactivity, because I'd be prone to go into a reactive place if I hear something and I take it personally. So he would suggest observe without observation, or rather observe without evaluation, share feelings, express needs, and make a specific request. So it's kind of outlined in that way, in that sequence. But the way I might approach it, for me, is what am I feeling or what am I needing? That's the heart of it. And of those two, to me, the most essential are needs. What's interesting about that is that we're not trained to think in terms of needs. We're not trained to consider our needs. We're not trained to consider the needs of others. And often I might say, I need you to go to the store. Even though I've said the words I need, go to the store is not a need, it's a strategy. And that's one of the things that so intrigued me about his work, the way in which he discerned distinctions between feelings and needs and between needs and strategies.
And that's where it can get confusing, I think. I need you to go to the store. Is the feeling about or the need about what I would want you to pick up from the store? Is it related to that? What can we just dig into that?
Sure.
So that's a very simple.
So needs, the best way I know to define needs is that they are qualities that sustain a life I cherish, a life of well-being. So you're going to the store may or may not be that quality. It's not really naming a quality. You're going to the store would be a strategy maybe for my need to be supported. Or for my need for ease. So that means there's a whole vocabulary of words that are called needs.
So, and that may be about my need to be supported around what, for example? Like, what would that look like? What might I need to be supported
So let's say you've had a rough day at work. It's been long. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And you get home and there's nothing to eat. And you might feel tired because it's been a long day. So that's useful information for you to connect to your feeling of tired. You might feel frustrated because the cupboards are bare. You might feel angry because you don't want to have to do one more thing today. So the beauty of those feelings of frustration and anger and tiredness is that they indicate unmet needs. So in that case, I might have a need for ease. Like, I don't want to have to do one more thing.
I don't want to have to
tired.
cook.
Right. I need something easy here. You see? So the strategy could be, oh, well, why don't you go to the store and pick something up? But the thing of it is, that isn't the only strategy. I mean, what if you're having this conversation with a partner and he's had the same wretched day you've had and he's feeling tired or frustrated or angry and he's like, I don't want to go. You go. So you can see where that conversation is going to go, right? Because neither one are really connected yet to their feelings or needs. They haven't shared them to themselves and they haven't shared them with each other.
And I think that can be so confusing because I can think, I do need you to go to the store. That is my need. So how do we work out that that's not a need, that's a strategy?
So sometimes the need will answer the question, what? What do I need? Let's say in this case, ease. So the strategy answers the question, how? So how will I get that need met? Oh, I'm going to ask you to go to the store. So sometimes strategies are about actions. They're about specific behaviors.
I was thinking also with that same example, I was thinking about a time about a year ago. I was looking at the list and I was really frustrated by something, and something just told me to pull out this list, and I was surprised at how many words I found that related to what I was feeling, and they were all D words. I meant to bring them with me today, but it was like I felt defeated, discouraged. I can't remember the other ones, but it was about 4 or 5 different words. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. But I wouldn't have thought about these specific feelings if I hadn't decided to look at this list. And looking at the words kind of helped me to get to it faster within myself. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes, because oftentimes we live in our heads. And we're constantly thinking about things, but not necessarily connected to our feelings. And in this work, feelings are just as important piece of information as our thoughts. And so if I don't connect to what my feelings are, then how can I know what my needs are?
And so I mentioned these lists. Can we explain the list for a moment? So there's a needs inventory and a feelings inventory. These are in the book, nonviolent communication in Marshall Rosenberg's book.
Yes, they're in the book, and they're also on the website, www.cnvc.org. That stands for Center for Nonviolent Communication. So you can go to their website, and I think they have a list of feelings and a list of needs, and you can download them if you want. They're free. And these lists are not necessarily definitive nor exhaustive. One might say there are more feelings or there are more needs that could be added to them, but they're a great list to start from. The first page of feelings is feelings when our needs are satisfied, and there are a bunch of feelings there. And then there's a whole second page where feelings we feel when our needs are not satisfied. So that's a lot just to start with. And that's why I think it's useful to work from the list at first and for a long time, because a lot of what we're doing here is undoing the way we tend to think about things and connecting first with what's alive in me in terms of my feelings and needs. And having a vocabulary for that is important. You know, you mentioned earlier to say, I feel defeated. See, that's an interesting word because it's along the lines of words that sound like feelings, but they aren't. One might say, I feel abused. I feel taken advantage of. I feel manipulated. I feel bullied. And just because I'm using the phrase I feel in front of those words doesn't mean that I've named a feeling. And in fact, those words, bullied, manipulated, taken advantage of, defeated, are judgments. They're interpretations. They're not feelings.
Okay. Now, I thought that was on the list.
I'll have to take a look.
Do we have?
See, here's one. If you want to.
Is it? I want to look at the D's. Disconnected. That I see. I remember that was one of the words. Let's see. Disturbed. So I guess defeated wasn't there. Detached. Okay. Distant. Those were things I was feeling. Okay.
And I wonder if your experience of looking through the list and naming the feelings helped you not just connect to what was alive in you, but perhaps ease some of the tension of holding those feelings. In other words, did you feel a little calmer as you looked through the list and saw, wow, I feel disheartened or discouraged? Or
I don't know. I don't know if I felt that, but I felt it gave me such an awareness. Because they were feelings. It was a situation with someone else, and that I was experiencing with someone else. So it let me know, wow, these are serious feelings that I don't want to have. You know, I don't want to have these feelings, and it was a relationship, and I don't want to have these feelings. So. But yet I do. So it was making it reality for me and giving me an awareness of my emotions. It was helping me to put words to the emotions I was feeling.
So may I ask you a question? And please feel free to say no if you don't want to answer it. So when you said these were feelings that you didn't want to have, what does that mean?
That means I'd rather feel joy than pain.
Okay. But I would suggest that those feelings are very valuable.
Okay. Yeah.
And in fact, very useful because it can help me know where I am in a given moment.
Right.
If I'm feeling discouragement in a moment, doesn't mean I'm going to feel that the rest of my life.
It did. I totally agree. It helped me to know where I was in that given moment, and that wasn't where I wanted to be.
Yes. And then the beauty of that, though, going, gosh, I'm really discouraged, is to go with the speed of light. That was what Marshall Rosenberg would say. With the speed of light, go to the needs. So if I'm feeling discouraged, then I know immediately one thing, I have an unmet need, or maybe more than one. Unmet need. So then rather than spend my time and energy getting angrier, if that's the case, or getting more discouraged, if that's the case, spend it instead in curiosity. Take a look. So what is it that's missing? What is the need not being met that invites the discouragement, because these feelings of discouragement don't just pop out of thin air.
Right.
They're connected, and that's the beauty of Marshall's work. He saw the connection, the relationship, the very deep relationship between feelings and needs. Mm-hmm. I don't know of anyone who has done that kind of work that Marshall has done. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, I have not read every piece of literature on communication.
Is he a psychologist?
He was a psychologist. He started out as a psychologist, and he, in fact, came from a very turbulent background. He lived as a child in Detroit during the riots there, and I think, if I remember correctly, it may have been for 4 days they hid in their home behind locked doors as bullets were flying all around. And so he had an early introduction to that level of violence, and that may well have shaped his interest in this work. I honestly don't know. I'm making up that story, but I suspect that did have a bearing. And then at some point, he worked or studied with Carl Rogers, who was a very eminent psychologist of the 20th century. And then at some point, he left Carl Rogers. He also left the practice he was in to get more curious about what is it that helps us stay connected to our compassion. What is it that helps some people stay connected in difficult times, and what is it that helps others not stay connected?
So is the idea that if I can be connected to my feelings and have an awareness of my feelings, then I can have an awareness of what you're feeling?
Well, I think that is ultimately what it leads to. You know, for him, the language, the answer to the question, how can I stay connected to the best inside of me, comes from language. And how I'm talking to myself about something is important. If I say, well, he's an idiot and he's a moron, and who does he think he is? He can talk to me like that. Then I get into this intellectual spin and increase my chances for being stuck there, but not really learning anything new.
Right.
So if I can take it a little bit deeper, so how do I feel about the way he just spoke to me? You know, maybe I feel hurt. Maybe I feel pain. So what then is my unmet need connected to that feeling of hurt? Is it to be seen? Is it to be heard? Is it to be understood? And the beauty of that is that acknowledged need can then help me determine the strategy. So let's say I have a need to be understood. I'm thinking, I don't think he heard me. I don't think he understands. So then what would I want to do? Well, I might want to have a conversation with him, a very calm conversation, and share with him in our most recent conversation when you said whatever it was he said, I was aware of feeling hurt and in pain, and I have a need to be understood. Would you be willing to hear my side of this?
And that's a different thing from saying, I don't like that you did that.
Yes.
Because then that sort of sets a different tone. The person can become defensive. But if I say, you know, I'm feeling, you know, alienated, I'm feeling disconnected right now, and I'm feeling misunderstood, and I have a need to be understood.
Well, I don't know that I would necessarily feel misunderstood, but I would have feelings around the perception that I've been misunderstood.
Okay.
I might feel frustrated
okay.
because I'm not being heard in the way I want to be heard, or I might feel aggravation because I'm not being heard in the way I want to be heard. So making these distinctions between feelings and needs is so important, and this is what we do not do.
And you know what I just said, how I just said misunderstood, and then you explained, that is sort of the crutch for me around nonviolent communication, because I'm so used to thinking a certain way. And how do I get out of that trap? Is it just practice, just like you?
It is practice. It really is practice. You know, what was helpful for me, and when I began this work, by the time I met Marshall, I had already been introduced to the whole world of feelings. I wasn't one really to speak very much to my feelings, but I had a number of events in my life that invited me to do this. So by the time I met him and he's talking about feelings, I'm like, yes, I get this. But when he started talking about the relationship between feelings and needs, it was like a real aha moment for me, because it was like, yes, it was never quite enough for me to say I feel angry or I feel frustrated or I feel worried, because I didn't have anything really to connect it to. But when he started talking about needs, I'm like, oh my goodness, it was like a whole new world opened up for me, because I had never thought about that. You know, typically I would say, I need you to go to the store, or I need you to call more frequently. You know, I'm not really naming a need. I'm kind of jumping a step, but the step I'm jumping over is the most important one.
And so then to name some of these needs, for physical well-being, I might need sleep or food or sexual expression. I might need, for honesty, I might need authenticity. For connection, I might need compassion, consistency, empathy.
Yes, the lovely thing about the list is there are lots of needs to choose from. And what's interesting, my own experience with this, is if I'm completely befuddled what my need is, then I'll just go down the list. And inevitably, really, without fail, this word will pop up. And that's fun in its way, because it's a process of exploration. And discovery. Because sometimes I might think, well, I have a need to be heard, and then in fact it might be, no, wait, I have the larger need for ease. But I haven't yet named it, and so I just stay befuddled.
Right.
But once I name it, then it's so much clearer. Oh, ease. Well, how am I going to get that need met? It's easier to get the need met when I can name it. And what we do, and this is what saddens me, we typically speak to one another in the language of strategies. You do this or you don't do this. And we do this whether we are in a professional relationship or a personal relationship, in our role as lover, in our role as parent, in our role as friend. We're constantly telling each other what it is we are to do. But we never address the feelings around that or the needs around that.
You know, I was just thinking too, last week I was really bothered by something, and it bothered me for hours. And I think if I had pulled out the list, I probably would have gotten to it faster. And it wouldn't have taken me, I wouldn't have stayed in a space for so many hours. Do you find that it can save time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's a very interesting piece of information. The scientists have by no means studied all of the brain, but what they have studied so far, if I go into a reactive place, or what they might call the reptilian part of my brain, I'm there for 20 minutes. So that's where I am.
And the reptilian part is the part where it's like I'm just mad, I'm just in a space.
That's the part of the brain that perceives danger or safety. And that can look in different ways. If, for example, you're screaming at me, you're upset. Why didn't you go to the store? Why, then that would be an invitation for me to go into the reptilian part of my brain in the reactive place. And even though you're not really threatening me, my brain might hear that as a threat. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so I have created enough stir among all the parts there, the hormones and the chemicals, that I'm going to be in this reactive place for 20 minutes. And the interesting thing about that is, if you were to say to me quite suddenly, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, I may not hear that. Because I'm in this reactive place. And that's assuming I don't add fuel to the fire. Like, she's never happy with what I do. I can't ever satisfy her, or as you noticed, be in a place for hours and hours.
Exactly.
So I think it's useful recognizing that if I'm in a reactive place, make no decision. Because I'm not in the part of my brain, the neocortex, which is sort of right behind the forehead, where the best decisions are made.
Right.
So that's why if I have a gun in my hand and I'm in a reactive place, I'm more liable to pull the trigger because I haven't moved out of that reactive place. I haven't connected to what's alive in me in the moment. You would think that that wouldn't be so. You know, we've all seen people who are angry in a way that's very obvious. You know, they might be screaming and yelling at the top of their lungs. And the interesting thing about that, the fascinating thing about that, they've not yet connected to their anger.
And it turns very quickly.
Well,
it can turn very quickly.
It's really clear to all of us that they're angry.
Yeah.
But they haven't yet connected to it.
But what gets me is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
ahead.
off. What gets me is what you're saying. And then I was thinking about my brother, my late brother. He could get so mad, and then he could get so angry, and then in a moment shift out of it, just come down. So that's what I was thinking.
And the other piece of it too, if someone is in an angry place like that, then we will probably be induced.
Yes.
So if I'm a defiant type of personality, I might get angry back. Or if I'm a compliant type of personality, I might withdraw. But you can see in either one, I'm not really connecting, and the other person isn't really connecting. What shows up are the defenses, but not the people themselves.
Right.
So there's no meaningful connection.
And this is where, say if the other person is in that reptilian part, is this where we might ask them if although they're not connected to their feelings, is this where we might ask them about a feeling?
This is, so you're talking now, I think, about empathy. So this was another piece of Marshall's work. Yes, if someone is in a place of anger or they are distressed, it is not altogether helpful to tell them what to do or to sympathize. A lot of times we have behaviors because we have been taught these behaviors, but they're not altogether useful. They're not altogether helpful. So if someone is in a place of distress, the best thing to do, if you can manage it, is to hold a safe presence. So if they're screaming and yelling, they can do so in safety. And when I'm talking about safety here in this moment, I'm talking specifically about not holding a judgment. So someone is screaming and yelling. So what I can know immediately, they're in some kind of pain. And not try to fix that pain, not try to make that pain go away from them, but to be present to that pain. And that is such a gift, to be in the presence of someone who is not judging me if, for example, I am screaming and yelling.
I love that.
You know, where can I get that? And then what will happen, to the extent that the person who is listening and simultaneously offering empathy, I will begin to hear myself. I'll begin to go, wow, why am I screaming? Wow, what am I feeling? And I will begin to connect. Now, it is possible that if I don't, then the way I understand empathy within the context of Marshall's work is I might ask them, so are you feeling angry? And when I have had people do that to me, often I'll go, no, I'm feeling frustrated. Because a lot of my anger is born out of frustration. But you see, the moment that they bring that question in, are you feeling angry? Then that's going to direct my attention away from my head and a little more into my heart. So if angry doesn't feel like quite the right word, it invites me to get curious. So what is it? And it might be, in this case, frustration.
Right.
And then a person can sit with that for a little bit because they may have more feelings. Maybe underneath the frustration is disappointment. Or maybe underneath the disappointment is a profound sadness.
And I'm thinking about you because you're so excellent with words. You're so excellent with words. I remember we went to look at a place for a retreat. I don't know if I think I brought this up to you years ago. We went to look at this place. They've since rehabbed it. I'm told it's been renovated, and it wasn't. It didn't look great. The accommodations didn't look great, and the language that you were using was just so. Like I was like, oh no, in my mind, in my thoughts, I was like, oh no, 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 no. And you were just. There was no indication that you felt that way in your words. It was just so perfect. And so I say that, and also, knowing how great you are with words and with MVC, sometimes I think about MVC if I want to talk to someone about something that's on my mind. But sometimes I feel a need to just not be delicate, to just be direct. Look,
right.
This is what's what. So what do you think about that? Do you ever have that need? Do you do that? Do you?
Oh, of course. I'm so grateful you saw me in a good moment, because I have other moments too, and will continue to. I mean, using this work doesn't mean I will never not feel angry again. I will never not feel frustration again, but I can connect to it more quickly. I mean, you know me well enough, although I don't know that you've seen this, but I have a temper, and that really surprises people. To know that I have a temper.
Yeah.
And this work has helped me change that to a large extent. That doesn't mean I never not get mad again, but I'm connected to it more quickly. So to answer your question, sometimes I do like to scream and yell, and I might do it in the privacy of my office. Marshall would say, enjoy the show. Have a good time. You want to get out the AK-47 and in your mind shoot? Didn't do that. I mean, he didn't use the AK-47 example. I'm just saying that. But sometimes that is useful. But then as I'm hearing myself scream and yell, I will begin to hear that and then get curious. Wow, I feel outraged over this. And then it's going to be back. So what's the need not being met? As you know, I'm in a relationship with a lovely man. I'm fortunate that Mason is interested in this material too, and we use it with each other. And sometimes we both of us are like, I just got to get this thing off my chest, And so we offer each other empathy. So if I'm the one that I'm just done here, I can't stand 1 minute more, Mason will simply hold a quiet place so I can explore. Because to the extent that I keep saying, I'm done here, I can't stand it, I can't get clear, what is it that I'm done? What is it that I cannot stand? I might want to make it about someone else. I might want to make it about a process, but there's also going to be some unmet need. And maybe if I'm unhappy with someone, it's because I'm not getting a need met. Perhaps I have a need for respect, and I'm not sure I'm getting that. Or perhaps I have a need for clarity, and I'm not getting that. And so it makes sense to me that I would be tripped up if I'm not clear what my feelings and needs are. So then I think if I wanted, though, to share that information with someone, let's say you and I are working in the same office, and I've had an unhappiness with you. Then if I can get clear what that is, what my feelings and needs are, then if I want to have a connection with you, then I would want to show up vulnerably, which seems to go against the grain. Like, no, not with her. But if I don't show up vulnerably, if I don't speak in a way that will help you hear me and help you hear my pain, then how can I expect any kind of resolution? That was a big piece of this. In his book, Marshall talked one time, I think he was in a taxi, and the driver was angry. He was talking about the Jews and how awful they were. Well, Marshall is Jewish. And he sat and he listened. And he gave this man empathy. Are you feeling unhappy with something that has happened recently? And then when the man felt heard, and you can tell when someone feels heard because they'll start talking less, the tone of their voice will decrease, and sometimes you'll hear them sigh. You will hear a literal and they kind of reached a plateau. They have begun connecting to themselves. And then Marshall does this thing I think that's so great. So would you be willing now to hear my pain? And to say it like that, as opposed to, you idiot, you moron, just stop what you're doing. You're way on my nerves. That increases the chances that we can have a real connection.
Right, right.
And that I'm not making you wrong. I'm not making me wrong. And then the beauty of that, I want to contribute to your well-being. I want to know what your needs are, and I want you to know what mine are. And then I want us both to get curious. So how can we contribute to each other's needs? How can I support you? And how would you be willing to support me? And that's a whole different kind of relationship. A whole different kind of relationship. Yeah. It is, I use this word intentionally, it is disarming for someone to be vulnerable and to state, I felt very hurt when I heard you say this about me. And I have a need to, for clarity. Would you be willing to help me know what prompted you to say that?
Yeah, I'm at the end of what you were saying, I was realizing how a lot of us don't know how to communicate, because I will say I have a need for clarity. I've said that to someone recently, and they always bring that back to me, and I feel like they're mocking me. They'll say, well, I have a need for clarity, but I don't feel that they really have a need for clarity. They're just trying to, bring it back, because I don't think there's a struggle when it comes to communication and these words. So a lot of us don't know how to communicate, including myself all the time. I don't know how to communicate.
Well, the beauty, though, of what you're bringing into this conversation, and honestly, I'm feeling very excited about this, for you to have the thought, are they mocking me? I think they're mocking me. Then a way to share that is say, when I hear you say, I have a need for clarity, I feel a little bit confused. The story I'm telling myself is that you may be mocking me. So I have a need to know. Would you be willing to tell me? Are you gently teasing me, or do you have a genuine need for clarity?
Exactly. Yes. That's perfect. And what is it you say? There's a word you use. Is it mind thinking, or that's not the word?
Mind reading?
Mind reading. Yeah, a mind read. Yes. Would you explain what that is? So
I don't know that this is necessarily from Marshall Rosenberg's work. It's in other arenas of psychology, but it's the idea that I pretty much know what you're thinking about me in this moment. I don't really have to hear anything you have to say. I'm like reading your mind. But the problem with that is that it may not be accurate.
Exactly.
That's a sort of a way of storytelling. I'm making up this story in my head that you don't like me, because I could tell when you walked in the door, you gave me that look. And it could be in your real life that you just forgot to pick something at the grocery store.
Right.
And you're angry perhaps in a moment at yourself, but I'm like, got a whole different interpretation. I've got a whole different story going on. And the scary thing, though, about that story is it's not really built on truth. It's not accurate. And if I start looking for other stories to support that, then what am I doing to my relationship with you?
Yeah. And I was thinking about how how do you think all of this ties into spirituality? Because for me, it is very spiritual. How does it tie into spirituality to you?
Well, it does. As you know, I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. And for me, the piece that excites me, this is a way of applying, as I understand them, the principles to A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles will tell us we're judging all the time. Right. Bad or wrong, good or bad. And this work goes around the judging. It doesn't say I can never judge again. You know, if I'm holding a thought, well, this person is obviously an idiot and a moron, then the value of those words to me is that I have made an observation with an evaluation. So then I can get curious. So what was it that the person said or didn't say? Or what was it that the person did or didn't do that helps me make the judgment or the evaluation that they're an idiot or a moron? And that's beautiful work. Because somewhere along the line, someone did something or said something that I didn't like, and I drew a conclusion and a judgment with the speed of light. And I'm not even aware that I've done that. So if I can unpack that evaluation. So what was that moment in time when I said he was an idiot and a moron?
What was I feeling? What was the situation?
Yes, but if I can get clear, you know, it was when he came through the front door and he didn't say hello.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. So how do I feel about his not acknowledging my presence? Was I hurt?
Right.
And what is my need? Do I have a need to be seen? And then how will I get that need met? Do I have the courage to say, would you be willing to tell me that you see me, or would you be willing to say hello? Because we all think so quickly in terms of strategies. And here's the interesting thing about a strategy. Sometimes we mean it as a demand.
No, that's true. And when you said that, it occurred to me lying. I think we have a... as human beings, I think I have a need to get you to do what I want you to do. And that could be me being dishonest, you know, and that might be, this is more honest. But I think in our nature, I might not tell you the truth about something because if I tell you the truth, you might not do what I want you to do. I think that's a part of,
that's
our nature.
That's kind of intellectualizing it, right? It's telling a story. If I tell him my truth, he isn't going to do what I'm going to do. So you know what? I'm just not going to tell him. I'm done with him. On to the next. So we're never really vulnerable.
Right.
We're not honest, just as you said.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
It's dishonesty by covert means by what we choose not to say. And it takes courage to do that. I mean, it really does take courage.
Yeah.
And if I'm approaching a conversation with someone and I'm aware I'm feeling anxious and nervous about having this conversation, then what's useful for me is to say to myself, you know what? You're having this conversation because you're supporting you. Because you decided you want to show up in this relationship. You want to be seen. So to a certain extent, it doesn't even matter if this person does what I think I want him to do. Because what really matters for me in this moment is I'm showing up. I am me supporting me. And whatever energies I have around someone doing something, they dissipate when I have that clarity. Because in this moment, that is what is the most important thing to do. And whether they do it or not, it doesn't matter. And then here's the interesting thing. There are far more strategies for needs than there are needs. So it's not like I've got this one need and there's only one strategy. There are probably hundreds of strategies for meeting the same need. I just happen to get wedded to the one strategy that worked for me. But am I taking into consideration that person's needs and that person's feelings? You know, it's interesting, going back to the example, there's no food in the kitchen, I'm hungry, and what are we going to do to eat? And you're not going to the store because you're an idiot no more, you know, that whole milieu. Then if both discover, well, I'm tired too. You know, if both discover we're tired and we both have a need for ease, and often that's the case, we do have the same needs, then maybe we go out to eat. Maybe no one has to go to the store at all.
Right.
You know? So that's the beauty of it. It's not just one strategy per need. There are many.
Yeah, so often we think the other person doesn't feel the same thing that we're feeling or doesn't have the same need
Well,
that
often
we
it
have.
doesn't ever get expressed.
Right.
Because we're trained not to go there.
Right.
Don't go there. Don't tell them that. Like somehow, I don't know, we make that scary for ourselves. And I don't think we serve ourselves well by making it scary to show up honestly and authentically.
Right, right.
I don't think it's going to serve a relationship long term.
Well, I think because vulnerability isn't associated with strength. You know, strength is associated with survival. Don't let you get too close.
Yep.
You know, things like that. So we have it sort of upside down.
We do.
Yeah.
And, you know, my question for that, how's that going for everybody? But, you know,
Right.
it is true. We do. I mean, I see it that way, too, that we tend to think of vulnerability as weakness, but it's a paradox. In fact, just as you said, that is upside down perception because it is in my vulnerability that I show up strong.
Right.
I'm saying, in effect, you don't scare me.
Exactly.
I will tell you. And I want to use the language that will help you hear me. Because a lot of times, and this is what Marshall Rosenberg observed, the person who comes in screaming and yelling, that boss is the worst person in the world, there's a gift to that. Because what is beneath any angry outburst is an unexpressed feeling and need. So even if someone is screaming and yelling at me, what I can know is they have an unmet need. It's not about me. Even though it would look like it is, they're saying, you don't do this and you don't. You know, for example, the wife who says to the husband, you never help around the house. You only think about yourself. I'm so sick to death of you sitting in front of that television. What is your problem? So what is her need? And to the man who might respond, stop nagging me. I can't ever do anything right. All I want to do is just watch a few minutes of TV.
Right.
Leave me alone.
Right.
You see? So you've got two people here expressing themselves in ways that make it really hard to hear what they're feeling and needing. And that's how we typically show up.
Right.
Expressing ourselves in ways that make it hard to hear. And that's the tragedy of it. That's why Marshall used that phrase, you know, the tragic expression of unmet needs when we're screaming and yelling.
Can you speak to the word willingness and would you be willing to and what that does?
Yes, this was a phrase I learned from Marshall Rosenberg. So this would be words that you would preface a request. So rather than say, would you go to the store? I would ask instead, would you be willing to go to the store? That's a big difference because I'm not saying going to the store. I'm really suggesting, I'm curious, would you be willing to go to the store? And maybe you're not. All right. So then what other strategy can we use? But here's the thing. You can't use would you be willing to as a way to manipulate someone into doing something. You know, would you be willing to pick up pizza tonight? No, I don't think so. What? Because if we use any of this work to manipulate people, this work will not work.
Yeah. And I find that it's often helpful to ask someone, would they be willing to, because somehow it's a gentle way of calling them to respond.
And here's the interesting thing about that. So if I were to ask, would you be willing to do X? And you say no, and I'm angry, then I didn't mean that and anything else but as a demand.
Right.
That's the litmus test for that. I don't like that litmus test particularly.
You don't like it.
Because I'm like, whoops, I did mean that. Even though I said, you know, you can say all the right words in the right way, but if the energy isn't congruent, then it's just manipulation.
Right. And I thankfully haven't thought of it that way because I like direct answers. So would you be willing to blank is a direct question.
Yes.
In a gentle way.
Yes.
So if you say no, then I know.
And the beauty of this work too is it's not like we're not telling our truth. We are, but we're telling it in a way that increases our chances for being heard in the way we want to be heard.
Is there another phrase that's comparable to "would you be willing to"? Because sometimes I want to use that phrase, or that's my question, but I feel like it's a little too formal, and so I choose not to use it sometimes.
I won't be very, I fear I'll be disappointing to you and may not be able to meet your need to know another phrase, because that is the phrase I use. I love that phrase. But I will say this, I had a friend to do this, and she had the same experience you did. That just seems so formal and unnatural.
Yeah.
But she decided, I'm just going to use it. And she did, and lo and behold, someone very near to her started using it.
Really?
Yes. But I do hear there is such a thing as street language of compassion and classic language of compassion. And in the practice groups that I offer, I ask everyone to use classic language of compassion so that they have the opportunity to say, I feel, and to actually name a feeling,
right,
or to express a need, to have a safe place where they can express whatever it is that they're feeling, whatever it is that they're needing, and not have to be worried about how someone hears that. But I do get that beyond the walls of the practice room, there's this other world. And some people might say, well, don't use that psychological crap on me. So then, some people might say, rather than do you need, they might say, well, do you want? Or do you value? I see that not quite as the same thing as a need, but if they're more comfortable using that, using a street. I mean, what's really important here is that we get the connection, that I'm heard and the way I want to be heard. And so if someone is put off by my saying, I'm feeling X and have a need for Y, and they want to know, just say it, in normal language, then I might do that so that they can hear me. And then I might be curious, so would you be willing to tell me what you heard me say? That's a very useful question.
It sure is.
Or would you be willing to tell me what you feel at what you said? Because that way I can see for myself if I was in fact heard in the way I wanted to be heard. They might say, no, I feel that you're being mean to me. Well, that wasn't the message I wanted them to hear. And a nice way to work around that is to say, so, well, what I'd like you to hear is this. Let me try again.
So what was it? I know you mentioned that you have a temper, and a lot of people don't know that. But was there an experience, or did you come to a point in your life that you're willing to share that you said, oh, I am just going to dive into this. This is really helpful for me.
So I was trying to think when I first met Marshall Rosenberg, I think it was 2003. And as intrigued as I was by his body of work, and particularly the piece about needs, I didn't necessarily use that diligently. I had the feelings piece down because I brought that to his workshops, but I didn't have the needs piece down. And so honestly, I tried other communication approaches and saw no difference, that I was still easily angry. And that happened for me most often in the context of my personal relationship with Mason. And that's when it would show up the most. And so I was tired of feeling angry all the time. And so I thought, well, let me try this needs thing. And that was when I started doing it diligently.
And
that was when it started making a difference in me, because it would offer me a clarity that I had not yet had. It wasn't enough for me to say I feel angry. I mean, that's useful information. I don't want to demean that. It's very useful to know that. But what is the anger about? What is the unmet need? And sometimes it may be I was projecting something onto him that wasn't even his. We do that, we can project so easily onto others. And to the extent that I'm not connected to what's alive in me, then it's easier to do that.
Right. And I feel I have a better grasp of nonviolent communication, language of compassion. But it was, and I'm not at Z, I'm still in elementary school
Well, so am I. So am I.
But I was just wondering, it has in the past felt like a foreign language to me.
Mm-hmm.
Did it feel like that to you in the beginning?
Probably the needs piece did. As I said, I already was well acquainted with feelings, so that part of it didn't feel foreign to me. But the needs piece did, because I wasn't used to thinking in that way. So the practice that you talked about earlier is really about training my mind to think in this way, to move much more quickly. Okay, I'm feeling X. What is the unmet need? With the speed of light.
Right.
And it's interesting because I think Mason and I both, because we both use it, have come to see each other very different ways. You can be close to someone and still have mind reads. And still have stories.
Right.
Yeah. And so to be curious about those mind reads, to be curious about those stories, to have the courage, the story I'm telling myself is, you don't really like me very much right now. Is that true? That's a whole different argument. I mean, a whole different scenario than the argument.
Right. Because I often have to just tell myself I'm wrong, and then I find out I am indeed wrong.
Well, it's not even so much about being wrong as much as it is acknowledging, the story I'm telling myself isn't accurate. I think that's a really
a more gentle way.
Well, but it's doing the same thing, because to say I'm wrong or I'm bad, those are painful places to go.
Right.
We're not wrong. We're not bad. We just may very well be mistaken. We have an interpretation that isn't useful. And that, I think, is part of spiritual work. I'm thinking now about Course in Miracles. Course in Miracles is very clear. I'm never angry at a fact. I'm angry at my interpretation of a fact.
Right.
So if you're doing X and I'm angry and I want to make you wrong, you never do X, Y, and Z, then that's an interpretation that isn't going to serve me very well.
Right.
And it's not going to serve the relationship very well. And this is true whether it's a personal relationship or a professional relationship.
And so in the practice groups, I just want to let folks know how they go. So in the beginning of your practice group, the members say what they're feeling in that moment. They sort of, right?
Yes, we organize our time in the practice group so that we do actually practice. It isn't a social group,
right.
Per se. So we do it in a series of rounds. And so the first round is, what am I feeling in this moment? And the practice for that is in part twofold. One, to stop in that moment and to connect. What am I feeling in this moment? To take that time to do that, to slow it down, and then to name the feeling. And it doesn't matter. I mean, if someone comes in and they say, I feel anxious, perfect. That's great work.
Right.
And then also to identify any needs. So if I'm coming in and I'm feeling happy and calm and content, then I have no needs in the moment. In that moment, they're all met. Now, 5 minutes later, I might be feeling something different or have a bunch of needs come up. So if someone said, well, I'm feeling anxious, then I would, ask, well, so what is the unmet need connected to the feeling of anxiety?
And then another round, speaking of slowing things down, another round might be to do an exercise where, say, I might have an exchange with someone else, and I know I might just go fast in my words, and you'll say, slow it down, and I might not want to slow it down, and it might feel like I don't need to slow this down. But as you do slow me down, I do start connecting more with the words and what I'm feeling.
I'm happy to hear that.
It is a deeper, it's a deeper conversation, from my perspective and the person that I'm talking to.
Well, I'm very heartened to hear that. Well, it's interesting. It's a little bit like when I'm in my mind with a lot of thoughts in my mind, it's a little bit like having the kind of day where I've got 5,000 things I've got to do. And I'm on a roll. Let me do X, let me do Y, let me do Z. You see what I'm saying? And not ever stopping to slow down and appreciate what it is I'm doing. And you know how you can kind of muster that energy?
Yes.
Like, I don't care what it is. I'm just going to plow through. I'm going to get it done. I'm going to get it done right now. And I'm going to be done with her forever so I can have time to, all that manic kind of energy that doesn't really offer peace.
No.
It doesn't offer ease. It doesn't offer any kind of order. So I think our minds can work that way too.
Right.
And
Exactly.
just, I'm constantly reminding myself, but Clarice, you're the one who made up the to-do list. That means you can make another to-do list, you see? Well, the same thing is true of my mind. I can slow it down. And that's hard for people who have quick minds. That may be the biggest challenge.
What do you think about, now women, this is a big generalization, women like to communicate, I think, and are used to at least putting forth the effort, whether we're successful at it or not. It seems more than men. It seems like a lot of men might not be so willing to communicate. Maybe that's not something you want to speak to, or not in relation to Mason. I'm talking very generally.
Yes, no, I'd be happy to speak to you.
Do you? I'm just curious about how this can land, or what we can do with someone who maybe they're not used to communicating, or they just don't have a willingness. If there's no willingness, I guess there's nothing you can really do.
Well, if there is no genuine willingness, but honestly, Mason and I have had talks about that. I think it is different for some men and for some women. Men have been taught, particularly in Mason's age group, and he's mid-century, to do. You grow up, you get a job, you support your family. They're not taught to communicate per se. But I'm not so convinced that women who may want to communicate necessarily speak their feelings or needs.
True.
Directly or authentically. I mean, that's what I have observed.
True.
That's been very interesting to me. So there's a wonderful book written many years ago, You Don't Understand Me. And I can't remember the name of the author, but she gave this classic scene at the breakfast table. The man is sitting at the table with the newspaper, scanning everything in the newspaper that he needs to know to help him at work. She's on the other side of the table, a cup of coffee in her hand, wanting to have a conversation with him because she has a need to connect.
Yes.
So you've got two people at the table with two very different needs.
I think that's so common.
His need to know and her need to connect.
Right.
So if you were to share that, literally lay those cards on the table, then what strategies might that couple come up with? So maybe they decide, okay, I'll give you 10 minutes of my undevoted time. Tell me what you want, and then I'll take 10 minutes to take a look at the newspaper. But see, she could do that now more calmly because she had her need met for connection.
Right.
So you see, letting needs inform strategies is much more effective than just having strategies with no informed needs.
Right.
And what we tend to do is just show up with the strategies. And I think
or just get mad, just get angry.
Well, we're frustrated because we can't get our need met.
Right.
He never talks to me.
Right.
He's always at the table with the newspaper like this blanket between us. And he's like, I don't know why she's so upset. I'm trying to get myself organized well enough so I can do a good job at work, so I can come home and bring the money so we can do a new kitchen, you see? And that's sad, really, particularly if both of them really love one another. And it always begins with that, I think. But it's going to be the communication skills that will determine if that love succeeds or not.
Right.
I remember seeing a commercial 1,000 years ago. In fact, reading a book about this, that in any relationship, 10% is love and 90% is communication. Love is a decision. That was the commercial. And I think part of that is the decision to communicate better. Because that's what we've got are our words.
Right.
Now, I know that there's body language as well, and that's very important. But at some point, if I'm going to use words, then how am I going to use them? What is the thing for? To what purpose will I use them?
Right. Well, so if someone would like to get in touch with you to either attend the practice group, if you have, space, or if they just want more information, can they email you? Or what would you suggest?
Sure, that would be fine. In fact, I'm offering a workshop on August the 24th. Okay. That's on a Saturday from 2 to 5. And I have 3 spaces left. So if anyone was interested in that, the way to get into a practice group, the way I organize it, is to come to the workshop first. And I do that not to be mean, but because I think it's useful to have an introduction to Marshall's work and to have an experience with his work. And that can happen in the context of a workshop.
Right.
I don't expect anyone to come into a practice group perfect and doing all of this. I mean, I'm still looking at the list, but at least to have an understanding that when we talk about the word feeling, it's different from the word need, and that's different from the word strategies.
Right.
And in the practice group, the value of that is to have a safe place to practice. You were talking earlier about role plays, where we give ourselves permission to be as messy as we want to. I'm so irritated at my sister, or I'm so frustrated at my mother, or my boyfriend is driving me crazy, So I say, great, let's bring that in and let's see how we can work with that using this approach so that you can be sure that you are saying what it is that you want to say in a word that increases your chances for being heard and the way you want to be heard. And I think it's an interesting process to do that, because to be in a role play, I think a person learns a great deal about themselves.
Right.
And how they show up. And some of that might be a surprise to them. And maybe not.
Yeah, and the workshops, I've attended 2 workshops in the past, and there were quite a few people in a circle, like maybe 15 or 20 people, the 2 that I attended. And then the practice groups, maybe a weekday or a weekend, and they're smaller.
Yes.
And I actually did. I remember it was really profound for me at the second workshop I attended, because someone was talking about their circumstance at her home with her son, and I was able to realize empathy in my family, what was needed for me. I thought, oh wow, a lot of times I'm giving my opinion all the time.
Wow.
When and it really, I started crying, because I thought, oh my gosh, sometimes my opinion isn't wanted. It's just to listen.
Yes.
So I really learned that in the workshop. Well,
what a beautiful discovery.
Yeah.
To have that information, because then you can work with that.
Yeah. So how would someone get in touch with you? By email?
Yes.
Okay. Would you share that?
Okay. So my name is Clarice, and it's spelled CLARICE 33 at bellsouth.net. So that's Clarice 33 at bellsouth.net.
Right. And then I should add that there's no charge for your workshops and practice groups.
That's correct. Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So see how generous you are. We wait till the end to let people know how generous you are.
Oh, I'm enjoying your kindness. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it, and I think our listeners will get a lot out of it.
Well, thank you. It was my joy to do this, and I appreciate your talent in interviewing. Your questions were easy and gentle, and so I felt very happy throughout.
Thank you, Clarice.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Thank you for joining us. There are 2 practice groups that we mentioned earlier here in the Atlanta area. One is located in Dunwoody, and one is located in Buckhead. If you're interested in those groups, you can contact Leanne McDaniel for the Dunwoody group, That is leanemcdaniel@gmail.com. That's for the Dunwoody group, which has practice groups on Friday afternoons. And then Nina Rourke holds practice groups every other Thursday evening in Buckhead. Her email is N as in Nancy, ROARK @earthlink.net. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and send me that email at letstarthealingpodcast@gmail.com. Let's start healing.